again, this is supposed to be working now, but if when something appears showing that volume thing, let me know if it quits. Okay, here's kind of where we got to last time. Just up until this point, I've just been giving you an introduction to what the course is all about, or what the topic is all about, what psychologists are studying when we talk about studying cognition. Gave you examples of a typical kind of mysterious problem. How is it possible that we can realize in a blink of an eye, less than a blink of an eye actually, that we don't realize, that we know that a word is not in our vocabulary, when the only way to know that is to search through 30 or 40,000 things that are in our vocabulary and see that it's not there. And it's even possible we have to search through all of our memories to see that word is not there. How is that possible in a fraction of a second? Equally amazing is, as we saw last time, kind of dissected the processes, the cognitive processes that have to go on in the split second between the time the pitcher releases a fastball and the time it crosses the plate, hits the catcher's mitt. The thinking and computations and calculations that have to go in to hitting a Major League Baseball in tenths of a second are just amazing, especially when if you're 7 thousandths of a second too late, it'll go foul this way, 7 thousandths of a second too early, it'll go that way. How do we do those computations? Well, one thing we can say is that they're completely unconscious, which we can say because nobody has the faintest idea what they're doing, they just do it. You kind of feel a desire to know it, and then a few fractions of a second later, you kind of feel the answer, but you have no idea what went on in between. That's a big issue, just there. So, how are we going to go about studying something like this? Especially at the early stage. Now, it may be a different thing when we start studying reasoning and decision making later in the course, but Here we're talking about recognizing things and making decisions that take place in fractions of a second totally outside of consciousness. One question is, how is that possible? Another question is, how could you possibly study it? Well, let's see. One thing we can start with is the basics of brain biology. Maybe if we know about the hardware, that'll give us some clue as to what's happening. Actually, it doesn't. The issue is, it's like if you want to know how Excel works, do you study what Excel does? Do you study the steps that it goes through? Or do you study the transistors? Studying the transistors, even though all those steps are executed on transistors, the level of the hardware of the transistors is so far from the level of the abstractions of the operations that you go through that studying the transistors is really not going to tell you much about how the program works. And we have that same problem with biology and cognitive psychology. It's like we want to study the software. Neurobiologists want to study the hardware because that's what they do. But in terms of using it to help us answer questions about cognition, it's actually been of limited use. So much so that I didn't even include brain biology in this course until, I don't know, 5, 6, 7 years ago, just because it was a separate topic. And students would sit there and say, okay, what does this have to do with recognizing letters or swinging a fastball? My answer is, I don't know. Seems like it must. You know, the brain seems like it's doing that stuff. So that's a limitation. And I'm kind of overemphasizing that because a lot of times people, until they get into it, think that the solution is to look at biology. And that just, it's useful now for reasons we'll explain today, but it's not the answer. It's not the answer you would think it would be. If only we understood the brain, then we would understand cognition. They're just at levels that are too far from each other. But there have been, in the last 5 years or so, such tremendous advances in the study of brain biology that they do kind of set some of the limits for what the processes might be able to do. It at least gives us an idea of what we have to work with. So now it's worth taking a look at. But again, I won't keep going on about this, but just to reiterate it one more time. We've got new techniques that make, or neurobiologists have new techniques that make the study of brain biology much more useful for studying cognition than it used to be. But it's still limited because, well, a good example is how do you understand how Excel works. But another one is, the simpler one, is if you want to understand arithmetic, if you want to understand the mental processes that go on while we're solving arithmetic problems, you have to what we're interested in is how the rules of arithmetic are being used, how the rules of arithmetic are being implemented. By which I mean, if you take 5 things and you have 2 more things, then you have 7 things. If you take those 7 things and divide them into half, then you have 2 groups of 3.5 things each. It doesn't matter whether you figure that out on your fingers, on a piece of paper, on an abacus or on transistors in the computer. It's the operations that matter when you want to understand the thinking. Now, if you want to understand the neurophysiology of it, then of course that's what you study. But again, I'm saying this, I'm placing such emphasis on this because it is just so often misunderstood by the general public, especially. We're interested in the software. And to some extent, it doesn't really matter what the software is run on. You run it on your fingers, run it on a piece of paper, run it on an old adding machine that you pull a lever on. That's not what we're interested in. What we're interested in is up here. But what I'm going to show you next is what has been a really revolutionary advance in neurobiology. And that is, you can tell where something is taking place in the brain. You can't tell what's taking place there, which is what we really want to know. But it's turned out to be very useful to know where it is. For example, as we'll see in a clip I'm about to show you, what's the idea of a screwdriver? What do you think, if we all are carrying around an idea of a screwdriver in our head, we must have that stored in some way in our brain. What is the information, do you suppose, that is stored in our brain of the idea of screwdriver? All the screwdrivers we've ever seen, maybe there in a particular lobe or something. Well, what apparently is the case is that even an idea as simple as screwdriver isn't a thing located in one place in the brain. It's when somebody thinks about screwdriver and you can tell what parts of their brain are active, the idea of turning is active. The idea of tool is active somewhere else. The idea of mechanics tool is activated somewhere else. And the idea of a screwdriver is all of those sub-ideas being activated at the same time. That's pretty valuable information. Again, we don't know what the ideas are or what kind of operations are being performed on them, but we do know that ideas are not unitary things. They're sub-ideas presumably because they're stored in different places, which we know because things, when somebody thinks of a screwdriver, not one place lights up, but lots of places. A pattern of activation occurs. How do you suppose neuroscientists have been able to tell what part of the brain is active? Does anybody happen to know that, how they do that? They listen with a stethoscope. Just kidding. Don't tell anybody I said that. What they do is take advantage of the fact that when nerve cells are active, they need fuel and they need oxygen. Well, how do nerve cells get fuel and oxygen? What carries it to them? The blood. So if you can tell exactly where the blood is flowing in the brain, you can tell what part of the brain is active. And a little later we'll get down to the different kinds of technologies that have done that. But there's something now, this has been so revolutionary in terms of pinpointing activity. Anybody ever had an MRI? I have. Now they're a lot less menacing, but it used to be a big, huge copper cylinder with a little hole in the middle of it, and they rolled you into the little hole. And you lay there for about 45 minutes and hearing banging, and it's hot, and that's not something you want to do for entertainment. But what it does is puts you in this huge, strong magnetic field, and then abruptly releases the magnetism. And when that happens, oxygen molecules act funny. And they act different depending on whether blood is flowing close to them or not. That's way oversimplified, but we don't. Getting into the actual physics theories behind that are way more than we need to get into. But what it basically does is detects where the blood is carrying oxygen in the brain. And that tells you with amazing precision what part of the brain is activated. So you can tell somebody, think of a screwdriver, and the screen lights up in a particular pattern, that even if you hadn't told the person to think of a screwdriver, if you knew how this worked, you could tell that's what they were thinking of from looking at the screen. This was a big deal. I mean, this is mind reading, and it really is. They call it thought identification, but it's mind reading. Now, the clip I'm going to show you is a segment from 60 Minutes about 4 or 5 years ago, when this was really big news. But it still is.
Stop recording.
Well, how about that? Okay, well, I've got to turn it off because of copyright violations anyway. I have another class in the business building where they did get it straightened out.
Did it have something to do with the configuration?
They say it has to do with the microphones being worn out. Just old. Okay, the slide. Now I can't record the actual show on integrity, but I can record the URL, which means you can go to it yourself. So let me.
Internet Explorer is blinking.
Oh, okay. Now I need to unpause so that I have to have it playing for this to act as an internet.
No, you don't. Pause it. And exit. Let's see. You see where your internet is blinking on the toolbar? And it's one of the yellow. The Internet Explorer icon is yellow.
The bottom.
Highlighted on your keyboard.
Fine with my living.
Click the video where it has the play button, watch the segment.
Yes?
No, up a little further, on the window where the brain is. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
There is a pursuit we all share. A better life for your family. A better opportunity for your business. A better legacy to leave the world. We have always believed in this pursuit, striving to bring insight to every investment and integrity to every plan. We are Morgan Stanley, and we're ready to work for you.
Should I get the live question?
Yeah, at least the ones.
How often have you wondered what your spouse is really thinking, or your boss, or the guy sitting across from you on the bus? We all take as a given that we'll never really know for sure. The contents of our thoughts are our own, private, secret, unknowable by anyone else. Until now, that is. As we first reported in January, neuroscience research into how we think and what we're thinking is advancing at a stunning rate, making it possible for the first time in human history to peer directly into the brain to read out the physical makeup of our thoughts. Some would say to read our minds. This is the technology that is transforming what once was science fiction into just plain science. It's a specialized use of MRI scanning called functional MRI, fMRI for short, that makes it possible to see what's going on inside the brain while people are thinking.
Every time I walk into that scanner room and I see the person's brain appear on the screen, when I see those patterns, it is just incredible, unthinkable.
Mind reading, what do you call it?
Thought identification.
Whatever you want to call it, what neuroscientist Marcel Just and his colleague Tom Mitchell at Carnegie Mellon University have done is combine fMRI's ability to look at the brain in action with computer science's new power to sort through massive amounts of data. The goal? To see if they could identify exactly what happens in the brain when people think specific thoughts.
Okay, are you ready to get started?
They did an experiment where they asked subjects to think about 10 objects, 5 of them tools like screwdriver and hammer, and 5 of them dwellings like igloo and castle, then recorded and analyzed the activity in their brains for each. You had them think about a screwdriver, and the computer found the place in the brain where that person was thinking screwdriver?
Screwdriver isn't one place in the brain, it's many places in the brain. When you think of a screwdriver, you think about how you hold it, how you twist it, what it looks like, what you use it for.
And each of those functions are in different places?
Correct.
Just as when we think screwdriver or igloo, for example, neurons start firing at varying levels of intensity in different areas throughout the brain.
And we found that we could identify which object they were thinking about from their brain activation patterns.
You're reading their mind.
We're identifying the thought that's occurring. It's
Wow.
incredible, just incredible.
Are you saying that if you think of a hammer, that your brain is identical to my brain when I think of a hammer?
Not identical. We have idiosyncrasies. Maybe I've had a bad experience with a hammer and you haven't, but it's close enough to identify each other's thoughts. So, that was never known before.
We asked if his team was up for a challenge. Would they take our associate producer, Megan Frank, whose brain had never been scanned before, and see if the computer could identify her thoughts? Just and Mitchell agreed to give it a try and see if they could do it in almost real time. So you've never done an instant analysis, as we might say on television.
Nobody's done this ever.
That's actually her brain?
That's her brain.
Inside the scanner, Megan was shown a series of 10 items and asked to think for a few seconds about each one. If it all comes out right, when she's thinking hammer, the computer will know she's thinking hammer.
Right.
Okay, we're all done.
So Megan, how was it?
It wasn't bad. Good.
Within minutes, the computer, unaware of what pictures Megan had been shown, and working only from her brain activity patterns as read out by the scanner, was ready to tell us, in its own voice, what it believed was the first object Megan had been thinking about.
I think the word is knife.
All right, one.
Right. Bingo. All right.
Then the second.
I think the word is hammer.
All right.
I think the word is window.
It's perfect, right?
So far.
And it continued to be, word after word.
Apartment.
10 out of 10.
10 out of 10. Well done, well done. And of course, this is just the beginning.
Exactly.
Who knows what you're going to be able to read? A
That's
little
right.
scary, actually.
Well, that's our research program for the next 5 years.
What?
To see how, we're not satisfied with hammer.
And neither are neuroscientists 4,000 miles away in Berlin at the Bernstein Center. John Dylan Haynes is hard at work here, using the scanner not just to identify objects people are thinking about, but to read their intentions.
So we're going to start now with the actual experiment.
Subjects were asked to make a simple decision, whether to add or subtract two numbers they would be shown later on. Haynes found he could read directly from the activity in this small part of the brain that controls intentions what they had decided to do.
This is a kind of blown up version of the brain activity happening here. And you can see that if a person is planning to add or to subtract, the pattern of brain activity is different in these two cases.
I always tell my students that there is no science fiction anymore. All the science fiction I read in high school, we're doing.
To Paul Root Wolpe, director of the Center for Ethics at Emory University in Atlanta, the ability to read our thoughts and intentions this way is revolutionary.
Throughout history, we could never actually coerce someone to reveal information. Torture doesn't work that well. Persuasion doesn't work that well. The right to keep one's thoughts locked up in their brain is amongst the most fundamental rights of being human.
You're saying that if someone can read my intentions, we have to talk about who might in the future be able to do that.
Absolutely. Whether we're going to let the state do it or whether we're going to let me do it. I have 2 teenage daughters. I come home one day and my car is dented, and both of them say they didn't do it. Am I going to be allowed to drag them off to the local brain imaging lie detection company and get them put in a scanner? We don't know.
But before we've even started the debate, there are 2 companies already offering lie detection services using brain scans. One with the catchy name No Lie MRI. But our experts caution that the technique is still unproven. In the meantime, Haynes is working on something he thinks may be even more effective. Reading out from your brain exactly where you've been. Haynes showed me an experiment he created out of a video game.
And you can actually navigate around if you want.
He had me navigate through a series of rooms in different virtual reality houses.
Now I would put you in a scanner, and I would show you some of these scenes that you've seen and some scenes that you haven't seen.
Well, haven't seen
So,
anything yet. Oh, okay.
And,
Okay, now I'm getting
do you
into
recognize
familiar territory.
something?
Yeah, I recognize the
And
bar.
right at this moment, we would be able to tell from your brain activity that you've already seen this environment before.
And so this is a potential tool for
It's a potential
police
tool, absolutely.
in the case of break-ins.
You might be able to tell if someone's been in an Al-Qaeda training camp before.
Have any national security agencies been in touch with you
Not in the US.
anywhere in the world?
Yes, in
Yes.
Germany, but
So there are people who are considering these kinds of possibilities.
And using them. In India last summer, a woman was convicted of murder after an EEG of her brain allegedly revealed that she was familiar with the circumstances surrounding the poisoning of her ex-fiancé.
Can you, through our legal system, be forced to take one of these tests?
It's a great question, and the legal system hasn't decided on this yet.
But we do have a Fifth Amendment. We don't have to incriminate ourselves.
Well, here's where it gets very interesting. Because the Fifth Amendment only prevents the courts from forcing us to testify against ourselves. But you can force me to give DNA or a hair sample or blood, even if that would incriminate me. So here's the million-dollar question. If you can brain image me and get information directly from my brain, is that testimony Or is that like DNA, blood, semen, and other things that you could take from me?
Court case, inevitable.
There will be a Supreme Court case about this.
For now, it's impossible to force someone to have his or her brain scanned because the subject has to lie still and cooperate. But that could change.
There are some other technologies that are being developed that may be able to be used covertly and even remotely. So, for example, they're trying to develop now a beam of light that would be projected onto your forehead. It would go a couple of millimeters into your frontal cortex, and then receptors would get the reflection of that light. And there's some studies that suggest that we could use that as a lie detection device.
And we wouldn't know we've got a red dot in our forehead?
No, you wouldn't. If you were sitting there in the airport and being questioned,
Yeah.
they could beam that on your forehead without your knowledge. We can't do that yet, but they're working on it.
Scary as that is, imagine a world where companies could read our minds too. Light beams may be a bit far off, but fMRI scanning is already being used to try to figure out what we want to buy and how to sell it to us. It's a new field called neuromarketing. One of its pioneers is neuroscientist Gemma Calvert, co-founder of a London company called Neurosense.
Do you have a lot of clients?
Yes, such as Unilever, Intel, McDonald's, Procter & Gamble, MTV or Viacom.
And she says it's a growing field.
What we've seen is a sort of snowballing effect over the last few years. I think there are about 92 neuromarketing agencies worldwide.
But some experts question whether it's ethical to scan the brain for commercial purposes and say neuromarketers may be promising more than they can really deliver.
If you image my brain and you say, aha, Paul craves chocolate chip cookies, and I say, no, I don't. Now, are you going to believe the brain over me? You can only do that if you have proven that that part of the brain lighting up means, in all cases, that that person desires chocolate chip cookies. And what a lot of people are doing is they're just imaging the brain, then they're declaring what that means, and they're never proving that it actually translates into behavior.
You know, it's very interesting. When you show someone a brain scan, people just believe it. It just reeks of credibility.
Absolutely,
And
absolutely.
you telling me that's the area where people add and subtract, I thought, well, of course, he knows.
But I could have told you anything.
I know.
So as brain imaging continues to advance and find its way into the courts, the market, and who knows what other aspects of our lives, one message is be cautious. Another is get ready. Back at Carnegie Mellon, Just and Mitchell have already uncovered the signatures in our brains for kindness, hypocrisy, and love.
It's breathtaking
Yes.
and kind of eerie.
Well, you know, I think the reason people have that reaction is it because it reveals the essence of what it means to be a person. All of those kinds of things that define us as human beings are brain patterns.
We don't want to know that.
Well,
That it all boils down to, I don't know, molecules and things like that.
but we are biological creatures. You know, our limbs we accept are, muscles and bone. And our brain is a biological thinking machine.
Do you think one day, who knows how far into the future, there'll be a machine that'll be able to read very complex thought, like, I hate so-and-so, or, I love the ballet because.
Definitely. And not in 20 years. I think in 3-5 years. Ample
In
does.
3 years.
Well, 5.
Next, please. It's been almost 5.
When you have joint pain and stiffness,
But they really are
little
getting there. I mean, everything they said is going to take place.
I'm Phil Nichols, I'm pro golfer. When I was diagnosed with psoriatic arthritis, my rheumatologist prescribed Enbrel for my pain and stiffness.
Really?
It helped stop joint pain.
Enbrel may lower your ability to fight infections. Serious, sometimes fatal events including infections, tuberculosis, lymphoma, other cancers, nervous system and blood disorders, and allergic reactions have occurred. Before starting Enbrel, your doctor should test you for tuberculosis and discuss whether you've been to a region where certain fungal infections are found.
No
You should
stopping.
not start Enbrel with an infection like the flu. Tell your doctor you're prone to infections, have cancer sores, and have hepatitis B, have been treated for heart failure, or
Anyway, what I was saying was that they were over optimistic at the time that this clip was made, which was 4 or 5 years ago. But they weren't wrong. Everything they said is true, and the only thing that was wrong was when he's saying 3 to 5 years. Maybe it was more like 10. It just hasn't moved. This kind of stuff that you're seeing happened really fast. As soon as the technology was there to check out your liver or to check out your pancreas, somebody got the idea, you know what else we can check out? And fMRI was born, and the advances at first were just mind-boggling, just amazing. But if screwdriver is such a complex idea that you think of screwdriver and not one place but different things all over your brain light up, think of what happens when you think of the concept of truth or the concept of charity or something like that. It's just even being limited to knowing where the thinking is taking place has proven far, far more complicated than anybody ever thought it would. So that's kind of slowed it down. But this is a extremely valuable breakthrough for neuroscience. It's huge. And it's an important breakthrough for cognitive science because we can at least identify what ideas are activated at a different point, even if we can't study the interaction or what's happening at that place or anything like that. So that's one thing we need to keep in mind is fMRI technology. The other thing, the other main thing that produced a lot of information about what different parts of the brain do and how the brain works goes back hundreds of years to the study of brain damage. It's been known for a very long time that if certain parts of the brain are damaged, certain predictable consequences occur in the person. I'll show you some examples of that in a minute. But what has been found from that kind of research and others like it is you might think that the brain is a single thinking machine, and that is whatever you're thinking about right now occupies the brain. While you're thinking about figuring your phone bill, well, your whole brain is devoted to the phone bill. If you're thinking about trying to find some detail on that wall back there that will tell me how to open the doors, your whole brain is devoted to that. You know, if you're thinking of is there hope for humanity, then your whole brain is devoted to that. That's not the way it works. The brain isn't a single unitary processing machine that we flip ideas in and out of. Even just from knowing what happens when the brain is damaged, you discover that it consists of a bunch of different units that have specific assigned functions. It's like a multiprocessor kind of computer where, for example, when you see, the information from your eyes goes to the back of your brain, to the primary visual area, and that's where the visual sensations are created, which is why when you get hit in the back of the head, you see stars. You're activating the nerve cells back there that create the experience of light. And that's what the primary cortex does. Hearing, same thing happens. The ears project to a module, you might say, to a unit here on the sides. The temporal lobe in here, this is really it's not where memories are located, but it's a central part of memory processing. If you damage this area, if you get hit on the side of the head in a certain way, you can't form any new memories. The rest of your life, it'll be the day of the accident. Everything else may be intact, but it can never be anything new. You can be introduced to the same person 10,000 times, and it's the first time you've met them. Because if this area is damaged, you don't necessarily lose your the memories you've already got. So that's not where they're stored, but you lose the ability to get any new ones in.
Okay, so saying like how you're getting hit like in the tip side or in the back of your head, what causes when you say like a boxer, when you get hit right in the jaw area, or when you just get that knockout effect, where you just fall and go to sleep?
It shakes the head so hard it creates a hemorrhage, and that kind of thing's a lot more dangerous than you would think. And now it's a big deal with NFL football players, even with all the protection they have. It's turning out that a very high percentage of NFL football players suffer dementia, and earlier than other people do. Because each one of those shakes, every time they tackle, every time they hit the astroturf, it shakes it again, and it does just a little bit of damage, which is cumulative. And that's not really well understood, but the NFL Players Union is really interested in it, and they've been creating a lot of publicity about it.
Same thing with boxers. They have many of them get a condition called pugilistic dementia, in that they that because of repeated blows to the head throughout their boxing careers, they suffer some sort of brain damage.
Yeah, no, that's right.
What part of the brain, though?
Well, that kind of thing, that's kind of what he was asking. That kind of thing is the whole brain, because the whole brain is injured. And it's not so much that there is a unique problem when the whole brain is injured. It's this and this and this and this and this. It's all of the units that get injured, and so the person just loses the ability to think. It's like their brain just slowly disappears. It's very unpleasant. In general, as you move from the back toward the front of the brain, the kinds of psychological processes located there get more and more complex. Back here and around to the side, up here, where it says primary somatosensory area, that's the sense of touch from different parts of the body. But the parietal lobe kind of starts putting together ideas from visual stimulation and auditory stimulation and touch stimulation. And then as you move, this primary motor area, which is in front of the primary somatosensory area, is when, I feel like when I want to raise my arm, I just will my arm to go up, and it does. It's not that simple. What happens is every muscle in your arm has to contract in just the right way, and a part of your brain has to program the neural impulses, so when they go down the nerves and hit the muscles in your arm, they'll hit them at just the right time, so they'll contract in a way to make the movement you want. But you have to know that worked out, that your programming was right, because if you make a movement different from the one you want, you've got to correct it. So you send the commands down, the movement occurs, whoops, that's not what I want, and you change the program, you tweak the programming basically, and it's a little bit different. The primary somatosensory area is right next to the primary motor area, so it can read the feedback and make it easy to tell the motor area what needs to be done. Tennis players, as they're practicing swings hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of times, that's what they're doing. They're doing the programming, sending the commands down, see what happens, and then tweaking it just a little bit, maybe thousandths of a second even. But that's what they're doing, and you can tell that. You can almost predict that from the fact that the programming part and the feedback analyzing part are right next to each other.
Well, what's that part of the brain with a jogger or a professional runner exercise for the signals to go to their brain?
Same thing. Now you will notice that a 6-month-old baby is not going to do a lot of jogging, and they're for a long time they can't even walk. Part of that is because the muscles are immature, that they're not strong enough. But part of it is they haven't learned the programming yet. It takes years and years to get those impulses to hit. I mean, running is a very complicated program. People try to program robots to run, computers to run, so to speak. It's very difficult to do. It's a very difficult programming.
Well, what about just simple walking, everyday walking?
Even that. You can tell that by looking at really young children trying to walk. They just don't get it. The programming isn't there, and it takes years and years of practice to get it right, which gives you some idea of the complexity of it. And each fiber in the leg muscle the right fiber has to be stimulated, and it has to be stimulated at the exact right instant, and down to 1,000th of a second for the contractions to be coordinated, and you do what you want. Even walking, even sticking up your hand, just takes lots and lots of practice because it's so complicated. Now, when we get to the very front, the frontal cortex, or even the frontal lobe, or even the prefrontal cortex, which is what we'll really be mostly talking about, which is the front of the front, that's where our humanity lives. If you look at a brain of any primate, it'll look pretty much the same, even on the outside, except the difference is we have this huge frontal lobe that other animals, even our closest relatives, gorillas, chimpanzees, don't have. This is where we plan the future. This is where we think philosophical thoughts. This is where we decide where we're going and what the point of everything is. How can I say that? Because if somebody gets shrapnel or hits their forehead against a windshield, they lose the ability to do that. I'm going to show you a clip. I don't know if we'll get to it today or not. I'm going to show you a clip of a guy who in Vietnam got some shrapnel lodged in his prefrontal cortex. And notice that when somebody's talking to him, he just seems like a normal person. Maybe something a little bit strange about him, but not bad. But what happens is he can't hold a job because he can't think in advance. As long as somebody is there telling him, okay, now mop this hall, he can mop the hall. Now, go down there and mop that hall. He'll mop that hall. But without anybody standing there telling him what to do, giving him a plan, he just gets to the end of the hall and stops.
In other words, he can't even remember to mop the hall or even plan to do it.
It's not so. It would be here if it were remembering. Here is planning.
Oh.
Here is.
Like taking an initiative?
Yeah, that's right.
Oh.
Didn't the UT sniper, didn't he have a tumor in his frontal lobe?
That was an emotion. That was down deeper. That wasn't on the surface here. That was down an area called the amygdala that affects emotion.
But frontal talks about both for reasoning, correct? Or
It does, but it's more gut level kind of thing. is stuff we don't think of as being biological at all. This is where we think about justice and beauty and what do I want to do with my life and what happens next week or what do I have to do? What am I going to do today?
Or wondering why things are the way they are.
Or wondering why things are the way they are. If there is somebody telling him what to do, telling him what to do next, if there is somebody giving him the big picture, he's fine. He can execute instructions, but he can't come up with the instructions, which means that's what this part of the brain does. It's kind of like the executive. It tells the rest of the brain what to do. Okay, now go out and get a job. Okay, now let's go to college.
So if he remembers things, why can't he have a list of things?
He can. All he has to have is an artificial set of instructions. If they're written, that's fine. If you're his boss and are standing there telling him to do it, that's fine. Now, you don't have to tell him, now move this, now move like that, now move like that. All you have to do is say, mop the hall. It's kind of the abstract point. You know.
Right, but you're saying he can't keep a job.
He can. Well, he can keep a job mopping a floor as long as somebody is giving him close supervision. But he's apparently a pretty bright guy before this. And the only thing that it's obvious that is gone is the ability to supervise himself, which means that we have a part of our brain, a specific part of our brain that's devoted to supervising, that's devoted to seeing the big picture and telling everybody else, okay, here's what we're going to do next. And that is, in fact, right up here. And the original reason for knowing that is that somebody gets whacked right up there, they can't do that anymore. They can't plan. They can't see the big picture. They can do everything else as long as somebody is telling them what to do. Yes. Spell that out some. Now, on my slides, I'm more specific than the book is. I talk about the prefrontal cortex. Think of prefrontal cortex and frontal cortex as interchangeable. They're not when you get into specifics, but it's close enough. One thing that is really striking about it is that it's an evolutionarily recent structure, meaning nobody else has it, which means we developed it very recently. If you tear off the surface of the brain, if you scrape off the cortex of the brain, we have a brain underneath all of that that's indistinguishable from that of any other mammal. Squirrels, rabbits, dogs, cats, rats, all have the same animal brain, and we've got that animal brain down there underneath all of the fancy stuff.
Did the Neanderthals have the prefrontal cortex?
Well, most animals have a little dab of frontal cortex. What they don't have is this big mountain of it that we have. That's what's different.
So early men didn't have the cortex.
As far as you can tell from that depends on what you mean by early man. Homo sapiens did. Neanderthals didn't, which is why they always draw Neanderthals with a sloped forehead. And then if you go back to the earlier hominids, less and less and less. This is what makes us us. This is totally speculative, I think, but there was some change in the frontal cortex, probably a mutation that corresponded to the development of language and civilization. Now that may be just a wild guess, but it's not quite wild. But that's basically what happens. Some creature develops some part of the brain that gives them an ability other creatures don't have. Ours is right there. So anyway, evolutionarily recent because we have it, nobody else does, which means we developed it recently. It's not directly connected to the senses, meaning it doesn't think in examples that you can see or feel. It thinks in terms of ideas. It thinks in terms of abstractions, not examples. Abstractions are general ideas as opposed to specific examples. That's a chair. That's a chair. That's a chair. That's a chair. But in my frontal cortex, I develop an idea of chairness. You know, of the general idea of chair and what chairs do, that is different from thinking about the individual examples. Individual examples, think of further back, as I think more and more with the front part, I think of more and more general ideas, less and less in terms of a specific example. And what it is that the frontal cortex is connected to many areas that do get input from the senses, and then they communicate with the frontal and prefrontal cortex, in which case all of these individual sensory inputs are turned into big ideas. Or so it would appear from looking at it. It's connected to emotional centers in the limbic system, which is what you were talking about, the limbic system, where, anybody ever hear of a prefrontal lobotomy? It used to be a common kind of surgery.
That was for memory, right? That's so they can forget, right?
Not quite. That's sort of what happens. But if you talk, I've never seen anybody who had one, but I've seen tapes of people who had them. And you have this ancient animal limbic system, which we all have in us. And we all know we have an animal nature in addition to our human nature. But that's a part of the brain that looks just like an animal brain. And then we sometimes feel conflicts between our human nature and our animal nature. That's because our human nature is up here, our animal nature is down there in the limbic system.
Are you talking about the reptilian and mammalian layers?
I'm talking about more like the amygdala and things down there, even lower than what you're talking about. These aren't even just mammalian. I mean, goldfish have an amygdala. But anyway, what happens is before they had a lot of psychoactive drugs, and when the only alternative was to tie somebody up in a straitjacket and put them in a padded room and let them run into the walls, what they did was this surgery that didn't take out the limbic system, didn't take out the frontal cortex, but cut the wires between them. And you see in movies like One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, this big cut like they took off the top of somebody's head. That's not how it ended up being. The surgery was you take a thing like an ice pick and run it up. You can even do this. This sounds crazy, but you can do it on an outpatient basis. You run it up inside their eye, wiggle it back and forth, and take it out. Do not try this at home. But all it did was cut the fibers between the limbic system and the prefrontal cortex. People who had been in the fetal position in a corner of a back ward for years were now on television talking about what they felt like. They would say things like, the demons are still there, but I don't have to listen to them now. They can't control me now. That's the frontal cortex saying the limbic system can't control me anymore. So that's why I'm not crazy. Now, unfortunately, when the operations worked, they were just spectacular. I in the mid-70s knew a psychiatrist who was in his 80s then, so he had been around a long time. He said, I prescribed hundreds of lobotomies, and I would do every one of them again if you understood the barbaric situation